It's 410, right?
You want to do it?
Yeah. Let's get started. Can someone at the back close the door, please? Himanshu, can you close the door, please? Thank you. Welcome to TEAS again. This is the second of the two sessions that we are having this week in the land of smiles. The blue sheets are out. Please do sign them. There are a set of links here that you would want to check out. We would be using Etherpad as usual for collective note-taking. You don't necessarily need to capture everything that's presented here. Just capture the gist of the conversation that happens here. Note well, if you're not familiar with it, get yourself familiarized. There's a link at the bottom that should give you the full details. If everything that you say here or on the mailing list is on the public record. In terms of logistics, this session is being streamed, both video and audio. For the benefit of folks who are participating remotely, please do speak only using the microphones. Please state your name before speaking. We did talk about Etherpad. We are also on Jabber, so please feel free to join us there. Folks who are participating remotely, please do join the Meet Echo queue if you have something to say. Nothing has changed in terms of personnel since yesterday. I'm Pawan Biram, Lou Burger to my right, and our secretary is still Matt Hartley. So that said, let's just jump right into the session. We will pick up from where we left off in yesterday's session. If Sergio, if you're here, can you walk up to the Sergio? Or Italo?
We'll put it at the end if there's time.
Let's go to the next presentation, ACT in Yang. Homian.
Do I have a toy to play with? Okay, hello everyone. This is Hao Mian from Huawei. I'm presenting the update to the applicability of the Yang model for ACTN. Which one? Where? This one, right? No. Okay, thank you. So this is the second update after the working group adoption.
Good.
Let's wait people to take a seat. So the motivation of this draft is to fit the existing models has been designed in different working groups into the existing ACTN architecture, which has recently been published as RFC. And after the previous meeting, the main change of this draft is something editorial by clarifying the abstraction and performance monitoring description and fix previous issues on this kind of topics. And we also provide some description on how the multi-vendor can do the interop in the ACTN architecture. And for the specific models and corresponding interface, we link more related drafts, saying layer number 1 to 3 service model into the ACTN architecture, and we also add some description about the southbound interface. So usually this was not in the scope of ACTN, but we only provide some information for description, and this is useful between the PNC and the device. So next, please. So here is the CMI interface model usage after the updating. And the changes is highlighted here. We basically adding the layer 1, 2, 3 service model into the CMI, and this should be co-located with other models, including the VNT service mapping, topology abstraction, everything. And we have actually other document describing how to connect between these models. Next. And then we also update the MPI modeling usage. The mainly change is to add the microwave into the whole architecture, and we add the microwave topology model abstraction as technology specific options, and it would be coexist with other technology specific models, including OTN, WSON, FlexGrid, everything. And next. So this document summarize how the ACTN interface can use what kind of IETF young models, and the related models referenced in this draft is basically becoming stable. And another good news is ACTN framework has been published as RFC, but I believe there is always new coming young models and should be fit into the whole architecture. So we will look into this in the future, but currently on the perspective of the authors, we believe this document is ready for the working group last call. And that's all. Thank you.
So this references a bunch of models, right?
Sorry?
This references a fair number of models that are
Yes.
still progressing through various stages, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see any good reason to hurry with the progress of this. I mean,
Yeah, right. But yeah, but we need to have a common understanding on how to finalize this work. If yes, because the model never ends.
no, at least the basic models that you are referencing, I would like to see them. This is my personal view. I would like to see them progress to a sufficiently mature stage before we can take it forward.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree with you. But we need to just clarify what is the basic model and how mature it is.
Exactly, Daniele. I totally agree with your question. The point is that here we are referencing a huge number of documents. So probably is a good idea to define a subset which we are going to wait for, and then progress. I agree with you that at least the basic one, T topology, T tunnel path computation, I would say, could be my proposal as the showstopper for the draft, but then we cannot wait forever. But I agree with you. Probably these three are at least my proposal.
One way to think about it is when this gets published as an RFC, which references do you want to be that are listed as drafts, and which ones do you want to be listed as RFC? Since it's informational and they're informational references, which is completely appropriate, the document, once we submit it, it will be published basically as fast as as soon as it's ready to be published, which means that all your references that are drafts are going to be published as drafts. And I'm not sure that's really the outcome that makes the most sense. We might want to have some RFCs there.
Yes, those three. I would like, personally, I would like to see those three referenced as RFCs, and the rest can be drafts.
Okay.
So we'll continue with our agenda and try to have a little time left over to come back to the tardy Sergio and Italo.
Should I use this or not? Yeah, it's working. Hi everyone, this is Dhruv. I'll be talking about ACT and VN Yang, which is one of the Yang models from the previous discussion. So this is just since we are starting with the session, just to show you where all the ACT and Yang models and other TE Yang models kind of fit in, and some of which are going to be discussed next. So what you see as service model on top, this is the augmentation of all the service model. This was earlier TE service mapping, which I think is the next presentation as well. So now we are augmenting the service model with the underlying TE information. Now this underlying TE information could be a ACT and VN Yang model, a TE topology model, or a TE tunnel model. So these are the three different levels of mapping that we have. So this is just gives you where does all these model kind of fits in. What is an ACT and VN Yang model? Just as a high level, this is the Yang model that models the VNS operations, which are defined in the framework and the info model. It is from the point of view of customer. It's on CMI after all. And the abstraction, it's basically an abstraction, a higher level abstraction on the TE topo and the TE tunnel model. And of course, we depend on those models, and I will show you what's the relationship. So there is some similarity, but they are quite different as well. So this will give you a very high level, what is the relationship? We have an ACT and VN model, which references the TE topology model as a single node. So that's what you see as the second level, the single node in a TE topology model. And then we use the connectivity matrix information that exists in a node to further have underlay topology at multiple recursions. So you could have an abstract topology, the third level, which is VN, which is also very useful for VN type 2. And then at the end, you have the native TE topology, which is also on the same model. So you can see how there is this recursive nature in the Yang model. But while the TE topology model is from the point of view of a network, it is describing how the network runs. The ACT and VN is from the point of view of customer. This is something that we went over last time as well, but just to refresh, what do we mean when we say that ACT and VN points to a single node? This is basically what it looks like. So in a single node in the TE topology model, you have connectivity matrices, which is the generic property belonging to all the elements in the matrix. And then you could have very specific properties assigned to each of the connectivity matrix entry as well. So that's what the VN member pointing to the ID, what you see right here, and the generic thing up top. I think kind of same thing in a different way. Single node and mapping to just a reference to that node, and then each VN member has an ID in the connectivity matrix where you can use the underlay information in the connectivity matrix to further know other information, including tunnel, topology, paths, etc. Example, from the customer point of view, we would simply have, I have this VN, it has 4 VN members. Those are the points that needs interconnection. And when you set them up, these are the properties for these. So these basically maps to, with a reference in the TE topology model, one node, all the attributes go to the connectivity matrices, this setting. So we have this relationship, but from the customer point of view, he can think of it as a VN, which maps to a TE topology model. This is VN type 2, with the difference that you have a single node topology on top, but also have a VN topology, which is an abstract topology that you show to the customer. And customer can also set paths based on these based on this VN type 2 topology. And it is all modeled in the same fashion as before. So you have in ACTN simply VN member. It points to a single abstract node. The single abstract node use the underlay path to refer to the VN type 2, and which can further recursively point to the actual native TE topology. What was the main idea behind it? When we wrote the ACTN info model, these were the set of actions
that we standardized in RFC 8454, that you have VN instantiation, VN modify, VN delete. So our main aim with this Yang model was how to clearly map these primitives that were defined in the info model into a clear Yang. But at the same time, there could be various operations that you can do. You could create a VN explicitly. That's where the VNS comes into picture, when you are explicitly creating a VN, or the VN could be automatically created. What is the case for that? The T service mapping, that when you customer only creates the service and the VN mapping to this is automatically created. So there is no config happening here, but it's automatically created like an auto tunnel, just to equate it to how that works. It exists in the state, but that state information is very useful. So you can map to how the service is using what in your network, right? And then in the document, you will see there are some advanced use cases as well, where the ACT and VN helps, such as multi-source, multi-destination, and VN compute use cases. Status, we got adopted a couple of IETFs ago. Main comments was the relationship between the other models were not clear, so we have tried to update and clarify how that's been done. Updated the other consideration section, so that's where we stand right now, and that's my presentation.
Adrian Farrell, thank you, Dhruv. I've been trying to do my technical advisor thing and get between the authors and the chairs on, is this VN model, does it have a purpose, or should we simply use the T model? And I found your slides quite good at explaining what's different and how the VN model is like a wrapper on the T model. So I have a question for the chairs. Do the chairs see that a bit more clearly now, or does more work need to be done to explain it?
I think the question is for the working group, of whether the working group sees value in this work, in the work and in the model.
That's a very valid question, but it isn't my question.
That's fine, but that's the question I'd like to ask.
Fair, fine. So take your place in the line behind me. My question that I'm asking is, do you, because you were the people who raised this issue.
So let's give us a second to go through a little bit of the process. Let's talk about the room, and we'll continue to talk, but give us a moment. So I'm asking you to wait a moment to respond. So how many people have read this document? How many people think that this is good work? Now that's not a surprise, because this is a working group document, right? So that's great. So continuing with the work is a good thing. So I think we've answered your question. Is this going? Well, I didn't ask that question. Does anyone object to the direction this document is taking? So I think that answers your question.
Well, thank you for assuming what answers my question, Lou. But you see, I have some respect for the chairs, although it may not be apparent at the moment. And the chairs were expressing that they, as chairs or as individuals reading the document, had some lack of clarity about where it fitted in. So I'm asking whether we've managed to clear that lack of clarity, or whether more work is needed.
Okay, so I heard you saying is asking the chairs if the chairs think there's value in this model.
No,
and if that's your question, I don't think it's for us to answer that.
That's not my question.
So if you want to ask what issues we have with that, I'm happy to answer that as well. And why don't we do that right?
Yeah. So there was a specific issue that was raised, and yeah, it was a good question, which was what is the difference between this and simply using the T model? Sure. And I thought Dhruv did quite a good job of explaining what that was, and I'm asking, did that explanation help make it clear to you, or do we need to do more work to explain that?
again, I think that fundamentally is the question of whether we need this model versus just using the TE topology model, if that other model was sufficient. And I think the room has answered that question.
I'm glad that the working group think that's good, and that's fine. But you know, you guys have got technical ability, and I want to know, have we addressed it in your minds? Not is the working group happy, but you know.
So I do have a technical question. It's not the one you're asking, and if you would let me, I would ask it. Now, if you want to ask the question, want me to answer the question that you're asking, is do we have sufficient justification to have a separate model from TE topology? I think we've covered that.
Well, I guess that's good. That's good enough.
I mean, if you want,
it's not
I feel like
I
won't say. I'm really tempted to say the thing I said to my children, which is, I've given the answer of yes, let's continue. If you want to keep arguing, I guess we could change the answer to no.
To be totally clear, I'm not implementing this, and in a sense, I don't give a what's it. But I actually wanted to understand whether we've done the job of that you asked us to do.
I think you have done it because the room believes there's value in this.
I think the document has come a long way, and thanks for the work in making things clear.
Thank you.
The question I do have in going through this explanation, which I do appreciate, I think is a good one, is the model that's defined and the notion of VN. Is that something that is intrinsic to an ACTN implementation, or just or does it apply to any type of VN implementation? For example, I go through, this isn't a comment on the description. I think the description is pretty clear. But if you go through the actual model, it seems that there's nothing ACTN specific. It's all about virtual node control, and the description of a virtual node and mapping that down to the T topology. All good stuff. Isn't that a generic thing? Let's say someone has a PC, a controller, which can control a TE topology, but it doesn't conform with the ACTN model. Does it need a different model, or can it use this one?
I think you can, but my confusion is, like, I think this happened during our chartered discussion as well. Maybe we kind of think of this in a little different way. In my mind, when we do talk about ACTN VN, VN is a generic thing in sorts. It's a virtual network. But we define VN in the context of what ACTN can do. So in this model, of course it is, but if we add something, for example, if we say that this needs to be used for network slicing, yes, you use this as a base, add, augmented, and do something else. But this is the base, or could be a base for it. But that shouldn't mean that we should not call it ACTN. That's the part which I'm not very sure about. What's wrong with the word ACTN?
It's that the next person that comes along and wants to support virtual node, represent a VN, can't do it with this model because they're not implementing ACTN. And I don't think we want to stop them. So if this is in fact generally applicable, the only change we have to do is to the model. I'm not talking about to the document, but to the model. Remove the term ACTN, and then the next one come along and say, yeah, just use this.
That I have no issues with.
Okay. That's the only, by the way, the only critique or question I have on the document as it stands.
If it's just the namespace IETF/ACTN,
Exactly.
IETF.VN, no issue.
And ACTN is a collection of building blocks.
Right.
None of them individually is ACTN. If you put them together, you have ACTN. So you can implement all of them individually.
And where I'm headed is, or maybe us, assuming Pavan doesn't jump in and tell me he disagrees, is that we'd like this work to be generally useful and applicable wherever we have, we're modeling VN information.
That's very useful.
So I agree with Lou is saying. So basically, when we talk about ACTN and the models ACTN is using, it's pretty much everything that we are doing in this group, right? So and those building blocks, it's just like just players. Okay, they could be put in one band or another, or could be used individually. So, for example, if you use a T-topology model, say in Huawei, we're saying that you are using ACTN, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the solution needs to be anything to do with ACTN. It could be like any other framework that just happens to use topology model.
Okay. Thanks, Igor. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Young Lee. On behalf of our co-authors, I present. I'm glad that it doesn't have ACTN here. Traffic engineering and service mapping young model. Maybe that's a bit more prophetic, I guess. Yes, the issues discussed since a couple IETFs ago. We proposed originally T-service mapping as a single independent young model. And I think the argument was, why not augmenting existing service model, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 service model, and then share the same grouping by creating some grouping model. So there's some discussion, and I think I personally was convinced with Chair's suggestion to simplify, and operationally I think augmentation would be simple because it's just one model. And so we change young structure without changing the capability. Instead of having one single mapping model that connects service and traffic engineering, we created T-service mapping type as an independent grouping model. And then each of layer X SM model basically import that and to augment. So this picture basically shows we have layer X SM model, and this model basically augment the layer X SM model to inherit all the properties. And then whatever groupings that is needed for mapping types, we basically create one common T-service mapping types, young, and import, being imported to this augmented layer XM model. And then this model have all the references on VN and T topology and T eternal. So in doing so, we reorganized a little bit of VN and T tunnel selection policy. One of the main changes is we put isolation requirement, which is not expressed in original service model in the context of network slicing, like hard isolation with deterministic characteristic. For certain VPN instance, this service may require a very hard isolation, and deterministic latency means there's no little or few variation of latency. And hard isolation and soft isolation, I think this one is kind of synergistic with what Dongjie we're going to present in VPN Plus framework. And then we added another type, which is like availability. Certain VPN instances require higher availability than the others, so we specify that as one of the map type. Yeah, so this looks like a layer, I believe. Yeah, so this is a layer 3 SMT service mapping, which is augmented model of layer 3 SM. And likewise, this is layer 2, and this is layer 1. So the structures are almost identical, and layer 1 CSM has a little bit different structure, so it looks different a little bit, but basically it shares the same grouping that we define as a separate young model. So I think next step, I think authors believe that this draft is a good base for a working group adoption.
Comments, questions? So at the last two IETFs, we like rehashed the same discussion, and I remember that we had that. I don't remember the details of it, but can you tell us what the resolution was of those discussions?
Yeah, resolution was actually you proposed that why not augmenting existing
No,
model?
there was another discussion that Igor was bringing up about the service mapping.
No, this is different. I don't know what. Do you remember,
all right,
Igor?
I'll go pull the notes, and if we have
Sure.
comments on it, we can bring that up during the adoption call.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
on that, with that in mind,
Okay.
oh, by the way, it'd be great to have a non-ACTN example of the document.
Yes. I don't know what it was, but
How many think that this is a topic we should be working on? So again, that seems like a reasonable number. How many have read the document? I'll note that it's actually more than think we should even be working on the topic. That's sort of interesting. Usually it's the other way around. How many think that this is something that we should adopt as the foundation, as the starting point for work on the topic in the working group? Remember, and just keeping in mind, when we adopt, it doesn't say that the solution is locked. It says that this is where we're going to start and we can change. So who thinks that it's a good starting point? I think that's a very reasonable number. So we'll take it to the list. Thank you.
okay. Thanks. Let me read the title: Young Models for T Performance Monitoring, Telemetry and Network Autonomics. Okay. Yeah. Basically, this model supports performance monitoring telemetry as a report for TE tunnels and ACTN VNs. Okay, so we have two modules: IETF TE KPI telemetry and IETF ACTN TE KPI telemetry. And if you want, Lou, I can replace ACTN with VN.
So,
I don't mind.
just to be clear, what I'm talking about, and actually we both agree on this, is that if we're defining a solution, we shouldn't constrain ourselves just to ACTN-based solutions. So if someone wants to build a controller-based model that they say is not conformant with ACTN, but they still want to implement this model, they're free to do so. And that's really what we're all about. It's not that we're anti-ACTN. We're all about a controller-based approach, and that's ACTN. So
Absolutely.
We're not trying to diminish the name. What we're trying to do is actually enhance the work and enhance the applicability of the work.
Okay, I'll take it very positively. Okay. Yeah, and then not only telemetry, performance monitoring data is associated with TE tunnel or VN, but we also have network autonomics for scaling in and scaling out intent, being able to subscribe by the customer. And depending on what parameter they choose, it can be AND operation or OR operation, or you can actually mingle multiple performance monitoring parameters together to define scaling in, scaling out operation as a subscription-based. So we have, as I said, we have two models. One is TE tunnel and the other one is ACTN VN. We augment respectively. So status is, I think the only issue was when I presented last time, there's a question about stamp work. I think Greg says some of the data may be similar to STEM data. So why don't you use STEM data? So that was the history. And then in the revision of T IETF types, which was just separated out from T tunnel model, I think Tarek and other co-authors work hard to define this model. And in doing so, we actually reshape a performance metric container grouping to have one-way and two-way performance-related data for delay and packet loss and so on, and delay variation and so on. So basically, this model import that IETF types, and then we don't reinvent any parameters used for this model. We just import. So that is the resolution. And why this is different from STAMP? STAMP, first of all, doesn't have anything about bandwidth, but we need bandwidth, which is actually imported from IETF routing types again. And STAMP is more measurement, but this is more reported as a concatenated information, not just link data, because we have to give customer tunnel view or VN view. So that's the resolution. So as I said here, we use T types for the grouping defined in T types to specify performance data on T KPI telemetry, and also ACTMT KPI telemetry. We use the same thing. So these are the gist of the model. I'm not going to go in detail, but you can take a look at online. So next step, again, we believe that this draft has a good base for working group adoption this time.
Dieter Bell, Nokia. I noted that there are a few performance attributes like delay variation, and packet loss, which are technology specific. So I thought that these should define Yang models which are technology independent or neutral.
Delay is technology specific.
Delay variation. In circuit switch networks, there is no delay variation.
Okay, this one in the context of
and there's also no packet
IP
loss.
optical. You know, our assumption is always IP is a server layer, and optical is IP is a client layer, and optical is a server layer. So we are talking about in the multi-layer, multi-domain context. You always hit router elements. It's not just a pure end-to-end transport. That's not our scope here. Our scope here is multi-domain, multi-layer networks. There's always a packet optical interaction, and that causes some delay and delay variation. So it's not necessarily technology specific, but that's the reality of the network context that we are modeling.
Yeah, but shouldn't those attributes not be defined as augmentations for these specific layer networks?
About packet loss, I agree with you, but not delay. Delay is latency.
I was talking about delay variation, which is 0 for circuit switch networks.
What is ICTN? Is that transport only? What is it? Context is.
I thought you said this was generally applicable and we weren't going to use it.
No, I mean, without packet, router, and OTN's optical switch, what else we are talking about? I mean, that is the context,
Well,
right? Always.
It's not everyone's context in this room. So it may be yours, but we have different people here who like to use the same technology building blocks for different technology. And our approach, he's correct, has been to do a core model and then technology specific augmentations. It's not a big technical change. And in fact, from an implementation standpoint, it's no change. For you, but for him, it means that he doesn't have to mark that he's doing deviations. So it seems like it's a compatible approach and one that follows what we've done in the past. So I think it's a reasonable thing to consider. And if we were going to do an adoption call, that would be something you would want to see addressed as we go.
Then I think we have a trouble with T types. Because this is
maybe I can clarify
T types.
So maybe I can clarify something because I happen to have attended the ITU meeting, I think a few weeks ago. There was a very nice presentation about delay variation caused by asynchronous mapping in OTN.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
So maybe that settles the issue.
Okay.
So yes, there is delay variation.
Okay. Another issue is that we just import that T types. That's a T types, not generic types. So it's not my problem. I just inherited. So I think we have to change the T types. Do you want to go back to that trace? Probably not, right?
So If the issue is I want to deploy this on something that has nothing to deal with packet switching, and so I don't want to implement packet loss, I think we could separate the module, but I wouldn't go for another draft with just one thing. So if this is the requirement, I think we can do it as an augmentation. But I mean, we risk to have tens of documents, and then keeping everything together is risky. Also because this would be a document belonging to another working group, probably. So
we did the packet. We did a lot of Yang with packet.
Okay, even if it's this, please let's avoid having a document just for one value.
Mm-hmm. Tariq, as a co-author of the TE types, so we had a discussion on the performance parameters that we imported into the TE types.
Yeah.
We wanted to make sure that they are technology independent. I think you were engaged in that effort, Lee, as well. And I agree with the comment that the technology-specific parameters can be augmented for OTN or for the optical. But what we wanted to make sure is the TE types only covers the generic ones. So we don't have anything technology-specific.
His point is packet loss is technology-specific. So, and that it is in TE types.
I see, okay.
And, we do have, as we talked about before, we have the Yang doctor comments that we're addressing. So this is probably something that's worth looking at.
Yep.
Yep.
So we can talk about that, sure.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any comment on the performance metrics, but for expressing the scaling intent, do you have any references, or I would like some discussion on how the scaling intent is expressed. Right now, it's fairly arbitrary.
No, yeah, I think, depending on the parameter, say you have a VN, okay? You have a location 1, and you have a 2 destination location, load balance, maybe utilization. So I think scaling intent, basically, you can define, your when a certain utilization exceed or below, you customer will be able to program preset. When those things happen, I'd like to see load balance in different way, things like that. So it depends on performance monitoring parameter.
Yeah, I understand why you have it there. Just the way it's expressed, I would like to see some options discussed on the list.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Okay.
How many people have read this document? It's a decent number. Of how many people think this is sufficiently big for it to get adopted?
With the caveat or
With the caveat that the comments that were raised today get addressed. Little less than the previous number, but.
So I was unclear on actually the question you were asking. Do we address and then go for adoption?
That's the caveat. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, if and when those comments get addressed, do you guys think that this is enough? This will be sufficiently big by that time to get adopted?
The hope was that would get more arms up. I'm not sure it did, but it's still not a bad number. So I think we please do an update based on the comments that were received.
So what is because I depend on T types. Unless T types resolve it, I cannot do anything about it.
So TE types is going to be resolved to be generic, as well as, you saw on the list, there's some other changes that the Yang doctors asked for. So there's going to be some change there.
So maybe packet will be taken out, most likely, right?
So Tariq again. So the grouping that we define in TE types, it's actually applicable to multiple packet technologies. MPLS, this is what Ethel was telling me.
Right.
In Ethernet, they wanted to use the same grouping. So it is kind of generic, but not applicable to optical maybe. So we can take out these groupings because they are packet specific. I don't mind and put it there.
I would expect you would still have the type. It would be out of the base grouping, and you might have,
Correct.
So I would expect it to show up, but with some restructuring of the document.
Yeah, maybe
that's
we can create another grouping with our packet. That'll
Okay.
do it, and call something else,
Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
right? Then I think we are wait.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, but it's a useful packet loss is an important
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So it doesn't have to leave the document, but it would be taken out of that grouping.
Exactly. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
But the TE types, yeah, the TE types change wasn't the only caveat. Making it ACTN agnostic was the other piece.
Yep.
That, yeah.
VN instead of ACTN, I've replaced with VN. Fair? Okay.
I think we'll swap the next two presentations. We'll have the enhanced VPN first, and then we'll do Dan King's presentation.
Okay, good afternoon. This is Jaedong from Huawei, and I'm going to present the update on the framework for the enhanced VPN. Okay, first a little bit a recap of the purpose and scope of this draft. Basically, this draft describes the enhancements needed to the VPNs to support the requirements of emerging new services, particularly in the 5G scenarios, such as to provide network slicing. It includes enhancements in the data plane so as we could provide different levels of isolation from the soft isolation to the hard isolation. And it could also provide a determinism of packet loss and delay. And in the control plane, both the underlay and overlay control protocols need to be considered so as to enable the integration of the physical network, the virtual networks, and the services. Then in the management plane, we will consider the dynamic creation, modification, and deletion of the enhanced VPN services. And also the other components like OEM protection is also considered in this current draft. Okay, this diagram shows the overall architecture of the enhanced VPN. We can see that in the bottom, it is the enhanced underlay data plane, which is based on the mechanisms like the resource reservation or the scheduling to provide a guaranteed performance. Then in the upper network layer, it is responsible to create the customized virtual networks, which can provide the integration between the overlay and the underlay network. And on the top, we need the hybrid mode of the control from the controller and also the distributed control protocols to provide a dynamic, flexible, and scalable control plane and also the management plane. Then we will need a northbound interface to talk to the service customers or the other, like in the 5G, the end-to-end site managers, to exchange the service requirement or the service status with a standard interface like and data models. Okay, this diagram shows the spectrum of the resource isolation, which I think this the concept of isolation is being discussed in this draft. We can see that on the left end, we have the statistic multiplexing, which is we already have today. And on the right end, we have the absolute isolation, which can be provided by dedicated networks. And what enhanced VPN aims to provide is something in between, which is called pragmatic isolation. In this case, the purpose is to we provide some necessary isolation in some of the aspects, while we still allow some resource sharing in other aspects so that we can achieve them more economical solution for the requirements in the emerging services. So here, the certain resource here can be any network resources in either the data plane, the control plane, or the management plane. Okay, here we list the candidate technologies in different layers. This list is not exhaustive, just some typical technologies we can use. So first, in the underlay data plane, there are several candidates. For example, the flexible Ethernet. We can use other dedicated queues to provide some isolation in the underlay forwarding plane. Also, the time-sensitive networking is another option. Then in the network layer, we can use several technologies to build the enhanced VPN service, which is we can either use MPLS-TE. I think it's already available today. And we could also build it based on the segment routing, either MPLS or SRv6. Both can be used. And DataNet is another candidate technology in this layer. And actually, we think maybe some enhancement will be needed to integrate DataNet with the virtual networks requirements. Then in the control plane, we need to consider both the distributed protocols and the centralized model. For the distributed protocols, the RSVP-TE is one option. And if we use segment routing, the IGP, BGP will need to be extended to support this. In the centralized model, we will need to rely on the PSAP, BGPRS, etc. Then in the management plane, I think we can make use of the ACTN architecture and the data models defined under this architecture, and also the service models like layer 3 SM, layer 2 SM can also be used for the service creation. Okay, here's some history of this document. Actually, this draft has been submitted and presented since IETF 99. It was firstly submitted to RTGWG and also presented in the network slicing BOF. Then in the following IETFs, it has been updated with more information like architecture sections have been updated so that we can have a more complete view about this overall framework. And on IETF 101, after the presentation, the chairs suggested we move this draft to TEAS. That's why we come to this working group. And then in our last IETF, this draft was firstly presented in TEAS, and we got extensive discussion and interest to move forward. After our last IETF, we had 2 new revisions to this draft based on the comments received. Okay, this is the latest update since the last IETF. Basically, we add new references to the network slicing related works in the industry, and we clarify the description of the isolation requirement in the requirement section. Then in the candidate technologies, we simplify the introduction to the segment routing because in this framework, it is just one of the candidate technology. And we also update the control plane subsection and add a new subsection for the management plane. We also add new references to the candidate technologies in the draft. And there are also some editorial changes to improve the readability of this draft. Okay, so for the next steps, I think this draft has been discussed widely at a number of meetings in IETF. And this draft actually is a foundation of other related drafts in the other working group, like in Spring and in the LSR. There will be also more related protocol extensions in the other working groups. After several rounds of update, the content is getting stable. So the authors feel maybe it is ready to initiate adoption poll on this document.
Hi, Ketan Talalikar, Cisco. Yes, so this document has been presented several times, and it's an informational draft.
Yes.
But it has a lot of things that, as you mentioned in the presentation, and it looks like it's attempting to define some sort of an architecture,
Right.
right? And that's really going into Spring and LSR and all of those areas. So the question is this, I mean, what's here to standardize? Or is it just like a white paper? Because the standardization or whatever changes you need, I believe you have in the other drafts, right?
Just to be clear, this is the T's working group, traffic engineering architecture.
Right. And my question is, what is
if your statement is correct that it's an architecture document, this is the place to do it.
Yeah, but that's a question. It's an informational draft.
Yeah.
It covers a lot of.
Yes, it's an informational draft. It says.
Wait, microphone, please. Microphone, please. Name.
Stuart Bryant, one of the authors. It is an informational draft. It says informational on the front page. It's intended to show how you bring together a bunch of technologies in order to solve this problem. This is the right place to do it.
My question was not about.
Can you clarify what your objection is, or what your question is about the draft? If it's, I heard a couple of different things. I heard something about architecture, and I heard about what's the value of an informational document. So from a process standpoint, this is the right working group. There's no other working group that should talk about traffic engineering architectures.
Yeah, I don't think I asked about whether it's right working group or not. That wasn't my question.
Okay.
My question was that what are the things that we are trying to standardize here?
It's an informational document, so by definition, nothing.
Okay. So but from this document, we are generating requirements that need standardization in other. Is that?
I think we have to see where it leads us.
No, the other two documents that I referred to, which are in Spring and LSR, are standards tracked.
Okay.
So
it could be, we often define mechanisms that can be used in different ways in the IETF. And so this document is informing how one of the standard mechanisms can be used in a particular way to solve a particular problem. We have a lot of documents that do that.
Yeah, this is absolutely normal. Go and look at any of the MPLS-TP documents, go and look at the pseudo-wire documents, just go and look at 101 sort of documents for that are trying to operate in the transport space.
It is a reasonable question of what's the point and is there value. So the question will be to the working group is, does the working group see value in it? And if the working group sees value, great, we can move forward. If enough people feel like the person who's asking the question that there isn't value, we won't move forward. So that's our process.
So
Name,
I like
please.
Zafar Ali. I like to say a couple of things. One is that there is a draft that I have asked for slot in Spring, but didn't get it in past. And that draft has complete overlap with the content that are here. And if you want to bring this work to T's working room, I'll be happy to bring that draft here. But there is another draft that addresses the same space, but the solution points are different. Here, there are very specific notion of asking for protocol changes and new SIG types that are questionable. So in the context of the architecture, all of this is questionable. So now, I think the best way may be that if T's working group wants to work on this, then I bring that draft here as well. And so the both drafts will have fair chance.
But my recollection is that this draft is a superset of the draft that you've produced, because it's not restricting itself just to a Spring-based solution.
I think the question is that do you need a superset? And then I also have a problem with the terminology. Like it looks very much marketing thing, which is not what IETF does. So VPN plus or enhanced VPN and all of that.
I mean, I have serious objection. It would be fair if we have some discussion on both drafts. This draft is asking for bases, which is not needed. Some requirements are posted here. Some ways, very specific ways are proposed here that are not needed. And this has to be studied. And also it has to be studied by Spring Working Group as well. It's not just a decision of TEAS Working Group. It is multiple working groups that has to study this. Is this is the right direction? Is this is what we want to do?
Adrian Farrell, I would agree with Zafar if this document was proposing any changes to a technology. So if this document was saying we need a new SID to do something, we need a new piece of segment routing, then we should definitely be talking with Spring. And similarly, if this was proposing doing something new with an IGP, then whatever. I don't believe that's what this document does. And my reading of it is that it's saying Spring Working Group has produced this technology and it does what it does, and we can use it in this architecture. And that seems to me like a good thing. It's, if you like, it's saying segment routing is good, look how you can use it. And in another section, it says MPLS-TE is good, look, this is how you can use it. That all just seems like good and proper.
I mean, I have no objection with MPLS-TE side of things, but for segment routing, there are specific SID types are defined here.
No, not in this one.
No, I mean, if you go back to your slide, you have somewhere stars and yeah, this slide, right?
Yeah.
When you say one, that one means what? Can you explain?
Yeah, that will be done in the, if it is some segment routing related extensions, it will be done in the Spring Working Group.
One and two, on 1 and 2, you have a specific proposals that
not in this one.
Please note, he says it will be done in the Spring Working Group. He's saying that will be done in the Spring Working Group.
No, I understand that, and these are the areas where we have overlaps as well. So this is my objection as well.
The segment routing extensions, we will present that draft in Spring tomorrow morning.
And we would be very happy for the architecture discussion to happen here. If you have something that you think is relevant to the architecture discussion, please bring it. That'd be great.
Sure. I will bring.
Not a comment, just a question. Is like,
please.
Wim Hendricks, Nokia. I think one of the questions I have on this draft is what is the scale? Because if you look like Spring, typically it was a stateless architecture. We are going to introduce more state into the network with this technology. I think it would be good to clarify in the document what type of scalability in terms of state which we are expecting when using these type of things, because it probably, the reason why I'm asking is it might say which technologies are in scope or not in scope, because I think the scale is an important factor in this architectural framework to clarify, I think, what we aim to achieve with this.
I was actually just talking to the Spring Working Group, one of the Spring Working Group chairs, about a problem we have right now because of, and I will go back to the term that was talked about, we have some marketing going on. And the term SRTE is very confusing at the moment because you have people that have been doing TE for a long time. And when you do TE, you do introduce state into the devices in order to support traffic engineered path because you're doing resource allocation. And then there's other people who are looking at SRTE as purely just path steering, or PE, as I started to call it, path engineering. And that means something very different. And you have two different people that are hearing a term and thinking, oh yeah, I want to use that. And that solves my problem. The problem is one set wants to use it for one way and it implies certain state pieces, and others want to use it another. We really need a good definition, and this doesn't belong here, a good definition of what SRTE or PE or whatever you want to call it is, so that the two different groups can understand that they're actually talking about different things. And so I think part of what we're hearing here is you have one group, the ones that are here, that are saying SRTE, of course, includes resource management in the network, because that's what TE means. And we have another parts that says, of course, it doesn't, because SR is all about stateless. So I think we have a larger problem that's causing a little bit of this conflict.
Just to point on that, Spring has an architecture document for SR policies or SRTE.
No, they have SR policy. They don't have a definition anywhere of SRTE, and that's exactly what I was asking the working group chair for. Is can we get that? And so that when we have when we say the words SRTE, we know what we're talking about, and we end up with one definition. We don't have that right now. We're hoping that we will get one.
And the second point, just to what Wim said, and I completely agree with what Wim said, is that when we add these states in the network for this bandwidth management, there has to be some scaling analysis there, because if you're let's say proposing using agency state along the path, that has to be properly documented in the architecture document. What are the implications, scale implication on that? So from that angle is lacking.
Right. So I think if we had a definition of SRTE that said it excluded the resource management, we would have that. If it said it included resource management, we would have that. So we need that definition first, or we need that definition, and that'll help. And then we'll understand that we're talking about different things with, I completely agree, different state implications.
Daniele, this is the working group owning TE. Why don't we give the definition of TE instead of SRT? Then, if Spring is okay with that, we'll call it SRT. Otherwise, they will call it SRP.
I think it would be perfectly reasonable to have an informational document that says this is what we need.
This is what we mean by TE. Yes.
And I suspect that an outline of that document was actually written in order to prepare for the presentation that was given on Sunday by the two people sitting in the front row next to Stuart. That talked about TE in the IETF. So maybe if they turn that document into a draft, we would have exactly what you're saying.
This is Robin from Huawei. So I think that's the much discussion about this, the SRT. In fact, we proposed a draft about the SR for the network slicing. Yeah, so I think this is the framework is not confined to the SR, this specific. So I think that's later maybe move on to more discussion for the SRTE. And also that's the thing is that also maybe discussion the SRTE for the network slicing for VPN Plus, if it be discussed in the Spring working group or in the TIS working group. I think maybe that next step. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So we have another document that's actually pretty, that comes up next. We reversed the order, but it actually, I'm not quite sure why the authors were asking to reverse order. Was there a reason?
The other document had something about merging. So yeah, let's go to the next presentation and then we can get back to it.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, so hopefully the motivation for switching the order will become clear momentarily. Right, so this is applicability of ACTN to network slicing. And yes, it is ACTN because it specifically talks about ACTN and its applicability to network slicing. We can't generalize that. This was a piece of work, actually. The original motivation for this document was to present at a BOF, I think it was comms, when we were looking at network slicing and the potential technologies from management control plane and also potentially forwarding as well. So it's really sort of something that was just very informational. It was never really intended to be anything more than just a discussion document specifically for that session. What's happened is we started continuing to develop the document, trying to think about what do we mean in this working group for network slicing, when we're looking at the kind of traffic engineering requirements, what are the parameters, it's network connectivity, it's bandwidth, there's also components, functions that need to be interconnected in order to provide some kind of service. And then we started looking at the DNA of the potential solution that you would use in an ACTN-based environment. So we would have the ACTN functional components. We would have, so that's on the left there. Then we would have the specific service models that you would use from, say, the CNC to, or the customer to the CNC, or the application to the CNC, and then the CNC to the MDSC, and then the MDSC to specific technology domains for the end-to-end service. Then we kind of map through all the different models. And then most recently, the service function aware topology model was also included. Now, at the last meeting, I think Young Lee presented this document, and the chairs will kind of ask the room, well, is this something that the working group would like to continue to work on? And it seemed actually that there was a good indication of the room that, yes, this is a useful document. Now, remembering that it is also nice to kind of generalize some of the discussion documents that we have. This, of course, is highly specific because it talks about ACTN. And given the previous presentation and the scope of that document, as well as another document that I'm also a co-author of, which is applicability of the ACTN architecture to enhanced VPN or VPN plus, there seems to be a lot of overlap between these three documents. And over the last kind of number of weeks, we've been trying to figure out if there was a place to segment discussion across at least two of these documents. But actually, I think the pragmatist in me says that merging these three documents is probably the most optimal solution and removes the necessary requirement on me to actually edit a document. So that's even better. Yay. Now, of course, we can't decide on sort of behalf of everyone in the room if this is the right way to go. But our proposal is to take the previous document, as you saw in the previous presentation. It's really a discussion document that talks about sort of requirements for VPN and network slicing, the potential management control plane and forwarding technologies that you can use. ACTN is just going to be one subsection within that document. And really, we're not saying that ACTN is the only way that you can achieve network slicing, but it's certainly one of the ways that you can achieve network slicing. Adrian, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Yes, it's good to stand occasionally. Yes, so that's kind of our current thought is to maybe take portions of this document, move it into the previous document, sort of as a subsection, talking about the applicability. What I was also kind of thinking about with my co-authors for this document was preparing a version of whether, let's call it this composite document, G's document. Would this now sort of potentially be a document that we would have an informal or maybe a formal liaison to some of the standards organizations that are looking at network slicing solutions? So that's another question that I have for the working group. A question I have for the chairs is, from a process perspective, would we wait for a document to be adopted by the T's working group before we actually had a formal liaison to another standards organization to say, look, we've got a discussion document on network slicing. Does it meet any of the requirements that you might have?
Yeah, just to answer that last one, we don't do liaisons on individual documents.
Right, so it has to,
generally.
Generally.
I could look to Deborah, but I don't remember ever doing one. I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule about it. but I'm not sure what the IETF would say about an individual document to anyone other than it's an individual document.
And this is Deborah. Looking at this, it's as Lou said, we don't usually do individual documents, but what we could do is liaisons based on 3GPP already did liaison to us, right, Adrian? Saying about interest in the work. And another one that is doing this type of work is ITU Study Group 15. They've started a 5G work. So you could liaison to them just saying we have interest to look at architectures to support 5G or network slicing, and we'd be interested if you would communicate, the standard words we use to, if you can communicate with us on any work you're doing.
Yeah, if that's a value, that's certainly something we can do.
Yeah. Now, and
there's a question of timing of whether we do it now or wait until we have something adopted.
No, I would do it now.
It'd be fine to do it
Because
now.
Study Group 15 is going full blast along with this, and the only thing I would caution also on the individual documents, because I saw on the earlier one, the data plane technology was FlexE. Well, that's not the only data plane technology. And in fact, that one, depending how you define FlexE, is not standard. So be very careful. I would be very careful on any linking even to individual documents. Just make something very general, you've started looking at this. Because those data plane technologies belong to, to either OIF or to ITU.
Being contribution driven, if you think we should be sending a liaison, propose some text and we'll hash it out, and Deborah will certainly take a look at it and make sure we don't step into any minefields.
Cool.
Adrian Farrell. So there's a win-lose thing here for Old Dog Consulting. So Dan is carefully getting himself off editing two things, and I find myself being the person doing the merge. So these are all individual drafts at the moment. So I'm working with the authors across the three drafts to try to do exactly what Dan said, and which is essentially to put ACTN into Jidong's document as one of the candidate technologies for approaching the problem space. And I think that's working okay, but I keep having these wretched meetings to go to instead of editing. What I'm noticing along the way, and that cuts into this thing that you were talking about with liaison, is that we've got 4 terms kicking around which are almost the same. So VPN, VPN plus, virtual network, and network slice. And they seem to be pretty much same names for the same thing, depending on where you view it from. And I hope that will actually pop out explicitly in the edited document. And then to Deborah's point about data planes, the original, Jidong's original document was very packet focused, which was fine. As we bring ACTN in, it massively opens up the underlay network to be pretty much any TE technology as you would expect. So that becomes clear as well.
Cool. So I want to confirm that that Adrian and the authors think that it's worthwhile to do a merge of the documents, or if they think we should ask the working group if they would like to proceed with separate documents. So I'm asking the authors of the individual documents which way they prefer. And the interesting thing about it is Adrian and Dan may argue with each other here because they may have opposite interests. So specifically, authors, do you want to do the merge, or do you want to see if we have support for doing separate?
Okay, as a cause of the framework of enhanced VPN draft, I'm in supportive of the merging of these 3 drafts.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty clear statement. Thank you.
Daniele, I didn't have a question either, but I was freezing there, so I preferred to stand up.
It's good. It's important to exercise as well.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
a long flight.
No, it's warmer here. It's in between. So, provided that I think the VPN Plus is a good work, something that is missing and something that we should work on. we should be careful with saying that for us, VPN Plus is network slicing. Because if we merge everything and we say, this is our solution for network slicing, we are implicitly saying that VPN Plus is network slicing, not one of the possible declinations of network slicing, etc. That's what I'm saying. Network slicing is a much bigger problem. It's not just VPN Plus.
Yeah, I think that's not what I heard. I heard that VPN Plus solves part of the network slicing problem.
Yeah, so Stuart,
that's what
yes,
I heard.
it was originally intended to solve the data plane and lower layers and some of the control sort of aspects of it. Network slicing itself is a much, much, much bigger problem. And we deliberately, when we first did this, didn't use the term network slicing because we were trying to solve a problem that is universal, that's useful in its own right, was applicable to some aspects of network slicing, and network slicing is a very controversial subject, or it was when we started.
Right.
So, but it's not the complete solution to network slicing.
Okay, as a co-author of two of the three drafts, I support merger with clarification of what VPN Plus and network slicing means. And also another thing is we use network slicing in T's working group for TE network slicing. So I think we need to clarify that as well. We're not talking about 3GPP network slicing, but transport or traffic engineering network slicing. That's what our scope is.
So we actually need to wrap this up because we're massively over time. So the plan is for some document merging and maybe some clarification going in. And do we have an estimate of when that will happen? Are we talking months, weeks?
Hours. Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so that's going to be pretty quick. So we'd like to see if there's interest in working in the working group on this topic. So who's interested in working on the topic of the last couple? And that's a very healthy number. We of course will need to see the merged document to know whether or not it is a good foundation for work in the working group. I think we would like to, given the level of interest and discussion, we'd like to not wait for the next meeting to do a poll. And so expect the chairs to take a look at the document, see that it matches what we think the discussions have been, and then move towards a poll.
One question. So there is another draft as well, third draft. So I'll be happy to talk with the authors, but I think your assertion that we should not wait and all is very hasty. Unless the working group see the third draft is unfair.
Well, keep in mind that once something's adopted, that's the start of the process. And the nice thing is the content of the document, the ownership of the content moves from the individual authors to the working group. So it'll be perfectly appropriate at that point to look at the content that you have and have the working group say, yeah, we want to bring this into that same document and bring it in. And we could even do a replace if we think so, if that's the right thing. So just because we adopt doesn't mean we're locked in stone, and it doesn't mean the text that you can contribute goes on the floor. It means that there's an opportunity to bring it into the working group document.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, I'd be willing to work with the authors for the two drafts, even before the working group adoption poll.
Am I
that
willing
would
to-
be
that's a question for the other authors.
yes.
We
yes.
would be happy to have inputs.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we should all work together and come.
That
up
would be
with
great. Thank you.
Yeah, we are behind by about 15 minutes now. If the next presenter can jog over here, that would be.
Good afternoon. Yes. I'm Sergio Belotti. I'm going to present the interworking between controller and GMPLS. This draft has been already presented in the C-Camp last time, but was considered more technology agnostic, so now it's presenting here in TIS. So what is the purpose of this draft? The purpose is to present, to make some consideration about the fact that with respect the scenario in which there was GMPLS in the network, and maybe with NMS above, and with the set of protocol that we know GMPLS is based. Now there is the new scenario in which there is SDN, and particularly we consider the case of hierarchical controller like in a CTN context on top of GMPLS network. And the question is that someone can consider that as an alternative, and this document want to show the fact that the scenarios is absolutely compatible and complementary one to the other. The major changes since the last IETF is replace the name, because now is this document, and we receive some comment and remove some signaling option like a CRLDP, and we have updated references. There are other comments that we received that we have no time to address about BGPLS consideration, some comment from Adrian. Well, we will update accordingly next version. Okay, this is an example of interworking the topology case in which you have practically three type of interfaces. We have the interfaces one that is at the local resource discovery level, that is basically provided via LMP in GMPLS context. Then there is the interface number two that is providing flooding of information by routing protocol, that creating topology in the context of GMPLS. And we have the new one that is the third one between the controller or PCE, in case the PCE is acting as a central controller, and the different network element in the network. So in case you have topology update, you have surely a new number of LMP message to update with the new nodes. We have flooding of information providing the new message, and we have update towards the network controller. If, for example, if you use netconf and we use topology model, we use also use notification to provide information to the controller about the exchange, the change in the network. In case of service provisioning, we try to encompass all in this type of table, in which we provide information that with a different level, starting from complete distributed control plane, so practically based on what we know about GMPLS, with the path computation based on OSPF information passed up with RSUPT, and resource update again with the OSPF to create the traffic engineering database. And the second column that is exactly the major interest, that is the interworking between the a centralized path computation with the distributed signaling. So with the path computation that can be provided by PSEP or netconf, resconf, and then the setup that is still providing with the RSVT with signaling protocol. And then a complete centralized approach in which, again, we can also exploit both the PSEP PSEP or NetConf-Young model. So these are the three level and the three type of possibility in which we present the situation in which there is also complete interworking between a central controller and distributed control plane. So we receive on the last meeting good consensus about the topic, so the coexistent interworking between distributed and centralized controller. We are open to suggestions regarding more detailed description of the scenarios, maybe for recovery. We think that is a good starting point for this work, and so we would ask also to ask working group adoption. And well, one point that we probably need is to have some support or some interest from operators that can provide feedback about scenarios, and so to improve the document with the real scenarios from operator perspective.
Comments? I noticed that the document says it's a proposed standard. Is that the intent? Or is this going to be an, is there?
Is proposed to become
is
working
this supposed
group.
to be an informational document or a standards track document?
I think it is informational document.
Okay. I don't think that's what it said. Apparently I'm wrong. Okay. How many have read this document? How many think we should be working on this problem in the working group? It's actually related to some other work we've been doing. So both of those had, you know, an okay number. How many think this document is ready for adoption? It's an okay number, about the same. How many think that we should wait for the additions that the author suggested? No one. So I think that's an indication. I mean, I wouldn't say that that was huge support, not overwhelming. So we'll talk offline and see whether what we think should be the next step. The chairs will talk. So thank you.
You can keep it short.
That's fine.
Okay, I can do that. So just a very quick introduction. Like the previous talk was about GMPLS, this is kind of focusing on IP network and especially focusing on interaction with other protocols like BGP. I'll skip that. Let's just focus. The first key part is the interaction between the TE components and the non-TE components. So TE components is everything which is described in ACTN and how that fits in with the other non-TE interactions that needs to happen within a hierarchy of IP controllers. So that's something that's basically being described in this document. So we have the TE information kind of well hashed in the last update. This time, with the help of my co-authors and new contributions, especially from the BGP point of view, added what are the various things in the BGP protocol that can be used when you have a hierarchy of controller. What role would the route reflector play? What role would the routing policies can play? What are the different work that could be used that's been done in the IDR and other places when we have a hierarchy of IP controllers, and how it interacts with the TE tunnels or the ACTN VN that's been created using the ACTN philosophy. So we added details about the flow spec, the BMP, the BGPLS, etc. This document is not describing anything new. It's just referencing how the work that's been done in the TE part and the non-TE part can come together to reach services like seamless MPLS. So it gives step-by-step how things would have happened here, L3 VPN, etc. And then what we go in detail also is all the various control plane and the management plane protocol that can come in. So we described the PSEP work, which fits quite well. And in this update, we added details related to BGP as well. So policy, flow spec, BGPLS, BMP, etc. Just as a informational document describing how everything comes together. Still, from the Yang models as well, we kind of listed what are the various Yang models that are of interest. So we added BGP related. We still have a big question mark that's still undecided, is the Yang model at the service layer that is above the MDSC or the supercontroller is quite clear. Things are very clear at the device level. Things becomes a little dicey when we talk of network configuration model on the domain controller. So especially if you're doing an inter-AS L3 VPN setup, how do I tell only the domain controller of AS1 what to do? That part is not yet clear. So with this exercise, we also wanted to bring out what are the gaps that are kind of missing and something that we need to work towards. And if there is some other work that you feel fits into this, we would like to add that. So we really require some feedback here as well. We also listed some gaps, something that we think could be useful between the set of controllers. So when the two controllers are talking to each other, what's the best way to learn the capability of each of the controllers? Could the Yang model work best, or should we use some other mechanism? How do we set up the relationship? What's the best things to do here? What if there are multiple instances of controllers? So all these questions which are still open in our mind. So we really would like that discussion also to happen somewhere here. And basically the main aim for the presentation is we still need a lot of feedback. We have got few, especially from the BGP side, but from the other side as well, OEM and other Yang model things, we would require some feedback, some gaps maybe, what is missing. And like the previous work, which was focusing on the GMPLS, this being focusing on IP, we wanted to see if there is interest in the work here.
While Adrian is walking to the mic, is the scope just for applicability of ACTN to packet networks, or are you going beyond the ACTN framework?
So beyond the ACTN, because I'm talking about BGP, so that's definitely doesn't come in, but in this document does have the BGP related stuff here. And I think that's the main thing, because when we used to talk to some customers, they wanted this clarity that how is this everything coming together? Like, I understand this model exists, you have ACTN, you have this thing, but how does it all come together? What are the things that I need to worry about? So with that in mind, we wrote this informational document.
Adrian Farrell, very quick question. Do you see the possibility of a generic integration of all controllers type document that is all of your draft and all of the previous one, and possibly something else as well?
I think we can definitely talk about it. Yeah, it's a possibility.
Okay, that would be interesting. Although I note that the scope was just IP networks. Yeah. So but it's still interesting. It's an interesting idea.
I mean, his was IP networks, and Hamyan's was sort of GMPLS networks, and I wonder whether there's all controllers, all networks.
Yeah. Just quickly, how many are interested in the topic? Even if you haven't read the document, are you interested in this topic? That's a reasonable number. I think it would be really good to follow up on Adrian's idea and report back to the list what you've decided.
Okay, thank you.
And we're going to say the same thing we said to the last speaker. 5 minutes, please.
Question. Okay, this is not about ACTN, so just okay. So basically, this is about we know that we have like already several service mapping to tunnel models, and this kind of mess a little bit, right? So basically, to solve that, we wrote yet another model. Right. So basically, the problem is today is that the services, the service to tunnel mapping, it's service specific and it's explicit. Basically, you define the service foo. You define like a several configuration parameters, and somewhere down this configuration, you have this little leaf refs that point to one or several tunnels that you want to the service to be carried by. Okay, so in many cases it works fine, especially like in hard separation cases when you really need hard separation between services and tunnels that they're using. But in other cases, it presents some problem. Like, for example, the cardinality of services to tunnels could be M to N, where M could be a very large number of different services, instances of different types. So let's say it's 500, okay? So you basically configure 500 mapping. And the first question is, how do you know how many services you could put on this number of tunnels, okay? So before it goes beyond the utilization, the capacity of the tunnels. The second question is, what happens if you want to do a change? Okay, like for example, you add another site or you change the tunnel, and so today the only possibility is to go and issue another 500 reconfigurations to remap the tunnels to remap the services to new tunnels. What happens if some tunnels basically become underutilized and you want to remove them? So those kind of questions. So
do you want to flip slides?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have less than 2 minutes. But to go back? Yeah.
Right. So our solution basically, you map services to tunnel pools. You basically make service steering implicit. You configure services and you say, instead of mapping services to tunnels, you map service full to tunnel, based tunnel pool, like fast tunnels, okay? And you're done with the service steering. So everything else is all about managing the pools, okay? So for example, you can start with one tunnel and measure the utilization, see if it goes beyond certain threshold. You can add another tunnel, and you don't have to do all this remapping. If you add another site, again, basically you create a new tunnel, and but because it's already within the pool, so you don't have to do anything else. So this would, in our opinion, will clearly decouple the service definition from service steering, okay? And say you can have a service which could be delivered, say, by IP network, or it could be delivered by OTN network. So we can have the same model where you define the service per se, and then you just map it to different pools. Okay. So at this moment, it's just an idea how to make the service steering like a cleaner and easier to work with. That's all.
You'll be eating into your time.
I'm eating my time. It's fine. Very quick question. I like the idea of pools, but I would suggest to have also pools made by one single tunnel, if possible, because I would like to give the possibility also to say I want that specific tunnel to be used and not one of those tunnels.
The service mapping per se, right? So for example, if you define the service, you have two options. We just offer an additional option. We say you can use this tunnel, you use tunnel Igor, okay? That's it. Yes. Or you use tunnel pool, which is, say, red or fast tunnels, and then you do whatever you want to do within the pools, okay? You forget about service steering at this point.
Yeah, Italo Guzzi, I agree with Igor. I think it's better to have the option to either reference the tunnel or the pool, because otherwise we have to create a pool with one tunnel and then reference a pool. It's much simpler if you directly reference the pool.
So we really should move on to the next So I look forward to
That's
conversations.
perfect. My requirement was a single tunnel. If it's a pool of one or a tunnel,
Daniele, we got to cut and go to the next one. It was yours. So I think there's clearly interest in more discussions on this draft. And so if we can take it to the list and.
Just, I wanted your opinion. The chair's opinion about that. So that's an idea. If we're going with that, then we'll work with that.
I think again, it's not just for the chairs to decide; it's for the working group. And I think the conversation has demonstrated there's at least interest in talking about it on the list.
Sure.
I'll try to be as short as possible. 2 minutes, not more than enough. If this works. You're eating my time.
Oh, actually, you have more time because apparently we go to 6:10, not to 6. So you have 7 minutes.
What can I tell in 5 more minutes? Make it work, please.
Oh.
No, it's on. It's on.
Forward or back?
Back, the first one. Back. This one.
Just tell us a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Try the left button.
Okay. So scope of the draft. Basically, we received a lot of comments during many ACTN presentations and works. Okay, but how does this apply to packet optical or more in general to multi-layer? So main scope of the draft is to explain the applicability of ACTN to a multi-layer environment and how VPNs map into this. Focus is mostly hard isolation because you basically you go deeper into the stack when you want to go for hard isolation. This is strictly related to the TE and service mapping function. Next, please. Previous.
I think the left button works. It's just.
I'm not touching anything.
I know, but you can't. This button is delayed.
It's delayed. Okay. So yes. So before jumping into the packet optical stuff, just a recap of how ACTN and the layer 2, the layer 3 VPN services fit into the same picture. So here we have the hierarchical SDN controller. The MDSC is one of the functionalities of the SDN controller. So it's the guy that talks to the various PNCs, and the PNC itself is one of the functionalities of the domain SDN controller. One other functionality could be the VPN provisioning, call it VPN service box, which can use network models to ask the domain controller to set up a layer 3 VPN, a layer 2 VPN, or whatever, or device models to go and directly configure it on the nodes. Next, please. So this is a slide that you've seen in the previous presentation. These are the different types of TE and service mapping models. So new VN with the tunnel binding, existing new VN with the tunnel sharing, or new VN with tunnel modify. In particular, in the first case, we have three different subsets as hard isolation with the deterministic characteristics, hard isolation, and soft isolation. The focus of this draft is the first two items. Okay, so in the draft, you will see three different scenarios proposed. we can go through the first one because they are very similar. The first one is about a single, let me say, client domain, IP MPLS domain, a single server domain, so an optical domain. The draft describes what's the procedure to follow to build this VN spanning multiple domains, so something that is needed for packet optical integration for hard isolation of services. Basically, if you have several steps. On the northbound side of the MDSC, or better, the hierarchical SDN controller, you receive a request for a service requesting for hard isolation in the packet optical network. The request is processed by the MDSC, which decomposes it into a request for the underlay, which in turn creates new connectivity in the server, in the client domain, and then on top of this connectivity, it's possible to build the service. So step number 4, the VRF is created, and the binding between the service and the underlay infrastructure is created. Next 2 slides are basically showing, it's something you can find in the draft, are showing how this applies also to multiple packet domains on top of the same server domain, the same optical domain, or multiple combinations of them. We can skip them. Conclusion and the next step. So we wrote this document because we felt that there was the need to clarify some things, mostly how ICTN applies to hard isolation, packet optical integration, and the binding of services and VNs, T tunnels, whatever is an underlying infrastructure. So now the question: did the document solve the issue, shed some light on the issue? There are some other topics. If so, there are some other topics that you want to be clarified. You wanted to throw everything away because it's super clear? Is a question for the working group.
So is there interest? Any comments from the working group? How many think that this is a useful piece of work? Okay, so we have a few hands. How many think that this is not anything we should be talking about in the working group? No one. So it seems like the working group would like to hear more about this and maybe talk a little bit more on the list. It'd be good to, there we go. It would be good to foster some discussion there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Italo Busi from Huawei. I'm presenting this draft that is providing signaling extension for GMPLS for shared mesh protection. A bit of history, an initial version of this draft as presented in the last IETF meeting in the SICAM working group was mainly addressing the configuration of ODU SMP, but we got a comment that the basic requirement, what we are doing in this document is just extending RFC for A72 with a new protection type which can be used for SMP, and is very generic and not ODU specific, so we can this should be addressed to TIS, and we have therefore we have a new draft submitted at this meeting to the TIS working group that we are presenting. So there's that comment. What was the changes that we have done to the old draft is quite minor. We have made the text more generic, so we make it and we generalize the applicability of this document to SMP, and therefore we reference the ITUT recommendation 808.3, which is generic SMP specific definitions, and we keep the reference to A73.3 for ODU specific, and we have added a reference to the RFC 7412 that provides requirement of SMP in the context of MPLS-TP. The signaling protocol extensions are no need to change, so they were already generic, so they are okay. And we made some few editorials. So in the generic aspects of okay, we have said that generic aspects is 803, A73.3 is only audio specific, and RFC 7412 is requirements. And we propose to update 4A724 SMP generic, and can be applied to any technology. I will skip this to the light of saving time. So this is a brief introduction of what is SMP, the fact that we have working and protection LSP, and protection LSP can share bandwidth, and we need to signal them. Then the description of how we signal them are provided here and this in the draft. What are the changes that we propose? Is basically to create to define a new protection type as for shared mesh protection to let the nodes along the path protecting path that they need to implement SMP and use APS data plane for activating the protecting LSP, and then we change the behavior of the N and the O bits because the N and O bits are the behavior are defined for different protection types, so we have added how they should behave in case of SMP. So what are the next steps? We would like to get feedbacks from the working group, and we think the extensions are quite simple, so we think the document is almost ready for adoption if there is interest.
So there are 3 C types under protection. So you are proposing some change to C type 2, so it would be useful to point out which particular C type this is changing?
Yeah, 3. Yeah.
No, the C type for the object, right?
C
so
type.
C type, I don't think the draft. Yeah, you say it at the top. Okay.
Oh no, I think it should be the same as those today.
But there are three C types. But yeah, in the doc, when I looked for the C type, it didn't show up. But and we currently don't have any registry for LSP flags. But given that we are getting the types from various documents, we may want to consider that.
So your suggestion is to put the
right now that you don't have any.
Okay, we need to take it. Yeah, we will take into account in a revision. Yeah. Thank you.
Dieter Bello, Nokia. I have a question. The draft also talks about shared mesh restoration, which and says it's this is a similar mechanism like shared mesh restoration, but as opposed to shared mesh restoration, shared mesh protection is a mechanism that's supported by the data plane, whereas shared mesh restoration is done in the control plane. So how do the two mechanisms coexist? Is there any issue? Because both are dealing with spare resources in the network to use those resources in the event of a failure.
Okay, so your point is where you have both SMP and SMR in the same network? And I think that I will expect that the resource sharing will be different. So SMP and SMR will not share resources if they are on the same network. That's I don't expect they will coexist, but if they do, I think that I don't think you need to share resources between SMP and SMR.
Igor Bruskin. So, Idolo, what we're trying to standardize here, basically, I do not understand. What is the environment? For example, do you envision like multi-vendor GMPLS network that work harmoniously in like a shared restoration, shared protection thing?
Well, the requirement is that I need to set up in a GMPLS network the working LSP and the protecting LSP. And when I set up the protecting LSP, the intermediate nodes needs to know that the protecting LSP belongs to an SMP protection schema rather than SMR, or rather than linear protection. So they need to understand how to program the protecting LSP.
My question is it a single vendor environment or multi-vendor environment?
As of today, I don't expect it's going to be multi-vendor because there is no common APS signaling.
So why we're talking about this then?
Because it's a standard, it's a generic standard solution. So if
how many are interested in this work? It's a pretty small number. How many have read the document? It's more. That tends not to be a good sign.
Okay.
Maybe I'll talk with Pavan afterwards if we have a specific recommendation on how to proceed.
Okay.
We don't have
Yes.
one at this moment, other than try to foster more discussion on the list.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. I will.
I'll note that it looks like we don't have energy to keep talking, nor do we have time. You were up, or you had a draft that we were talking about at the end of the last session that we were hoping to start with at the beginning of this session. We're clearly not doing that now, but please continue that discussion on the list. It was really good one. We didn't want to cut it off.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all, and see you at the next meeting. I don't even know where it is. Prague.